Hey everybody! So we are continuing along with our season previews for the upcoming NHL season, and today we're going to talk about the Minnesota Wild. Before we get into the video, I just quickly want to say if you're not yet a subscriber to this channel, please hit that subscribe button and follow along for all the great hockey content. And if you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit that like button because that really helps out with the channel a lot in getting the video found. So, the Minnesota Wild, last season they finished last in the Central Division and missed the playoffs, and overall what was a pretty disappointing season for the Wild. I thought Bruce Boudreau would be fired at the end of the season. He was not. He is returning as the coach, although I think he is very much on a hot seat there in Minnesota. When we look at the Wild lineup, there's some interesting things to point out. One is that putting line combinations together for this team is pretty difficult because out of their 12 starting forwards, all but one of them are a left-handed shot, which means they need people to play the right side playing the off wing who are not right-handed shots, because Ryan Hartman is the only forward in the Wild's lineup that is a right-handed shot. All 11 other forwards in the starting 11 that I have is a left-handed shot. So it's going to be interesting to see which wings play on which side, who plays the off wing, who doesn't. And overall, putting lines together for this team is not an easy thing to do. For my line combinations, I mostly followed what Cap Friendly has as their depth charts. And I also looked at Daily Face-Off and see what line combos they had, and kind of mostly just stuck with what Cap Friendly had and then maybe made a couple of changes here or there. But here's what we're looking at for a lineup for the Minnesota Wild this year. Top line, Zach Parise, Eric Staal, and Jason Zucker. Zucker's been a guy that's been talked about a lot in trade talks and trade rumors. He's a guy that apparently the Wild are trying to move, but have not been able to find the right deal yet. We'll see what happens if he remains in Minnesota this year or if he gets traded at some point during the season. Second line, Kevin Fiala, who is an RFA still. He currently does not have a contract yet. However, Minnesota is not really in a big cap situation. They have money. He's a guy that I fully expect will get a deal done before the start of the season and will be in the lineup for the Wild at the beginning of the year. So Fiala playing on the second line with Mikko Koivu, who's coming off of ACL surgery. Last season he tore his ACL. He should be ready to go from what I've heard for this season. Obviously, a major injury like that takes a lot of recovery time, and especially for a guy like Koivu, who's at 36 years old, that is a late career major injury. But I believe from what I've heard, he's going to be ready to go for this year. And then Matt Zuccarello coming over from the New York Rangers in free agency. Well, not New York to Dallas for half a year last year, and then leaving in free agency to Minnesota. But Zuccarello is actually their major pickup this offseason. Minnesota didn't make a ton of moves this past offseason, and adding Zuccarello was really kind of their big deal. Third line, Jordan Greenway, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Ryan Donato. Very young third line there. And we need to start seeing some production out of these type of guys. Joel Eriksson Ek has been up with the big club for a couple of years, or at least a couple of years now. And he only had 14 points last season in 58 games. That's not going to cut it. Jordan Greenway now has, he's 22 and he's got a little bit of experience under his belt up at the NHL level. He only had 12 goals and 24 points in 81 games last year. Greenway needs to start to produce at a higher level than that. Eriksson Ek needs to start to produce at a higher level than that. Both were drafted in 2015. It's now 2019. It's time to start seeing some production out of those guys. And then there's Ryan Donato, who I think I've made my thoughts very clear on Ryan Donato. I am not a fan at all, but he will be playing on that third line probably with those two. And that brings us to the fourth line: Marcus Foligno, Victor Rask, and Ryan Hartman. Hartman coming over to the team. Hartman's played on a bunch of different teams already in his career. Most recently with Philadelphia, he was a free agent, and he was an RFA, and he got traded, I believe. Yeah, he got traded like twice, because he got traded from Philadelphia to Dallas, and then from Dallas to it was a whole thing with Ryan Hartman, but he's now on the Minnesota Wild. He has been, for a guy who's only 24 years old, he's played on a lot of different teams already, or not even played for Dallas, but was Dallas property for a short time. But anyway, he'll be most likely on the fourth line. He actually, for a fourth liner, he had a decent year last year, scoring 12 goals and 25 points as a bottom line guy. So that's not bad. He should bring some good depth offense to Minnesota, which is something that they definitely could use. As if you look at the point totals from last year for this Minnesota lineup, it's not a lot. Their leading scorer was Zach Parise with 61 points. I mean, they do not have a lot of high-end scoring. Moving on to the defense now, we have Ryan Suter and Jared Spurgeon as the top pair. Very, very good top pair there. Suter, even at 34 years old, plays over almost 27 minutes a night. He's an absolute minutes machine. He had 47 points last year. Suter is still one of, I think, an extremely often forgotten about premier defenseman in the league. He's a very, very good two-way player. And then Jared Spurgeon, really good offensive guy, especially 14 goals as a defenseman last year. Really, really solid offensive defenseman. Second pair, Jonas Brodin and Matt Dumba, really solid second pair there. And then your third pair is Nick Seeler and Greg Pateryn. Both of those guys give you good physicality, good toughness. They're more defensive defensemen. They're not going to give you a whole lot of offense. Both only had 7 points last year, but they're good defensive guys, stay-at-home defensemen, and they're both very physical players, willing to drop the gloves and throw their weight around when needed. In goal, Devan Dubnyk returns as a starter, and Alex Stalock will once again be backing him up this season. So for extra players, you have Luke Kunin, who is a young guy at 21 years old that I think will compete for one of these forward spots and possibly get a full-time NHL job this year. He did play 49 NHL games last year, but he's kind of been a guy who's like right on the brink between, getting a regular spot in the lineup and ending up being either a healthy scratch or sent down to the minors. He's right on that cusp of AHL, NHL, and I think he's going into this preseason and training camp hoping to get a full-time spot in the NHL lineup. They also have JT Brown, fourth-line guy, veteran guy, been around the league for a while now. He played 56 games for them last year. He'll potentially be an extra forward or maybe compete for a fourth line spot. Although I think with the addition of Ryan Hartman, I think his fourth line spot is kind of gone at this point. I think Hartman took that, and Brown's going to either be an extra forward or someone who could potentially get waived or traded. And then defensively, they have Brad Hunt and Matt Bartkowski as extra defensemen. So actually, their defense core is pretty deep. They are 8 defensemen deep for sure on that defense core, and that should be one of the strengths of this team this year. So, looking at this team, they play in a very tough division in the Central. And the Central Division's a division that I look at and think every single team in that division, all 7 of them, think that they should be a playoff team. Obviously, all 7 cannot make the playoffs. At most, 5 can. So there are going to be some disappointed teams at the end of the year. With Minnesota, I mean, they're very deep defensively. They have a good defense core that I like a lot. Their top 4 is fantastic with Suter, Spurgeon, Dumba, and Brodin. They've got a good bottom pair, a good tough bottom pair with Sealer and Patterson. They've got good extra defensemen as well, guys who certainly could step in and play decent enough minutes if someone were to get injured. My problem with this team, though, is just, are they going to have enough offense? Are they going to score enough goals? It's just the point totals aren't there, and they certainly weren't there last year. It's really hard to win in the current NHL where your leading scorer only has 61 points. I mean, we're at a time now where scoring is really coming back. We have multiple 100-point players every year. A lot of teams have multiple point per game players, meaning they are guys who score 82 or more points in a season. A lot of teams have multiple of those guys. We see a lot of 90-point players now. And for Minnesota, your leading point getter last year was Zach Parise with only 61 points. That would be like 4th or 5th in points on a lot of teams around the NHL. So I just don't know if Minnesota has the offense to score goals and compete with teams, at the top of that division, like St. Louis and Nashville, and Colorado is expected to be really good this year. And even teams like Dallas and Chicago, it's going to be hard. So while Minnesota certainly isn't a bad team, and they've got a lot of good pieces there, they're certainly not a bad team because of the division that they play in. I think it's going to be difficult for them to make the playoffs this year. They're to me, they're going to be a borderline, right on the edge team of playoff or non-playoff team, and it's not going to take much to bump them in either direction. If somebody, if they start getting good production out of this third line, if maybe Greenway has a 20-goal season and Eriksson Ek has a 40-point season and maybe Donato scores 20 goals, if they can get those young guys to step up and really produce offensively, that might give them enough secondary scoring to surpass teams like Dallas and Winnipeg and Chicago, and they might be able to bump into a playoff spot. If they have the offensive struggles that they had last year or again this year, they're probably going to finish last in that division again, just because the division is so difficult. There are no bad teams in that division, and it's going to be a dogfight all season long. So I think Minnesota is a team that could potentially compete for a playoff spot. They're a borderline playoff team, but because of the division they're in and how difficult it is, I think it's a bit of a long shot for them to get into the playoffs, just because I think there are better teams than them in their own division. But that's my thoughts on the Minnesota Wild heading into this season. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description below. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon and merchandise store are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.